We're going to talk about the inner healer and what's been forgotten along the way with all the high technology that we have to encounter. We're forgetting the laws of the past. So this is about how do we enhance our inner healer. And for those of us who think, well, maybe I'm not going to get sick. Buddha's 4 rivers of suffering, one of them was uncontrolled sickness. And nobody knows, whether they may or may not get sick. We don't understand why people get sick and others don't. The best quote I ever heard is, anybody who isn't confused here really doesn't understand what's going on. We don't know, kids die and get sick and other kids do fine, and people that are perfectly healthy, drop dead, and we don't really know what's going on. So the other thing that occurred to me, because when I wrote the book, The Spirit of Healing, which you can get online on my website, you can download it as a PDF if you want. It's kind of a bit dry, but you can get the book probably online through Amazon, or you can borrow it from our office. It occurred to me when I did this book, and the talk is basically based on the book, that the Spirit of Healing, which was the title of the book, is exactly the same as the healing of spirit. So for those of you who are not so interested in the inner healer, the principles here are exactly the same principles we've been talking through all our lectures. We're just putting them all together at one time today. And the healing of spirit is the same as the spirit of healing. Anything okay there? Great, so let's start off here with the 4 variables in healing. There's the patient, and we want to talk about the inner healer when we refer to the patient. And the inner healer is a magical thing. This thing doesn't seem to be working. Anyway, you can see it. Maybe the clicker won't work. The inner healer is a magical thing, and I think it's part of the soul. In reality, the soul is perfect, made in the image of the divine, and I think the inner healer is a magical, mystical thing, also made in the image of the divine. So it can do incredible things, but the inner healer has to know the truth, of the diagnosis, and we're going to talk a lot about that as well. Then there's the healer, and I say healer in many, many ways, that everybody can help other people heal. And then there's the field. The field is mostly unknowable. The Bhagavad Gita says, whatever being comes to be it motionless or moving, derives its being from field and knower of the field. So the knower of the field is the creator, the divine. If you don't like that word, use the force or infinite intelligence or field. It's all the same. All the principles apply no matter what your belief system is. But most of the field is unknowable, and it gives us access to non-space-time information, quantum information. Our intuition, our dreams, a lot of the things we've talked about in previous talks are related to field. So anybody who doesn't have a way of contacting the field is going to be limited in the healing, and we'll talk a bit about distant healing in a moment. And then, of course, there's the place of healing. The place is where we found ourselves, We're going to talk about Lourdes in France, this sacred place, mostly for Christians who go to heal. There are remarkable healings that have occurred there, as they have in other places. So that kind of place is important, but the main place I'm talking about is the home situation. Is the home situation dysfunctional? Is the work situation toxic? Is the doctor's office toxic? What is the hospital like? Are you getting the kind of information and care that you want? Have you got access to nature, to good food, to good water? All this has to do with place. So all of these variables, let's see if this works. All of these variables are important. So if you look at the whole paradigm a little bit differently, we have the healer who's responsible for placebo. Placebo is the power of belief to help heal and cure somebody. But by the same token, there's nocebo, which is the power of belief to hurt, harm, or kill somebody. And just like the inner healer requires truth, the nocebo thrives on guilt. And we'll talk about how dark witchcraft and sorcery uses guilt to help really do serious harm. But but you might think, well, doctors don't do any harm, they don't do any nocebo, but they do it unconsciously, especially because of us living in a litigious society. But in addition, you have something like informed consent. Now, informed consent can be given in an instructive, supportive, hopeful way. In other words, to educate the patient as to what we're going to do if something does go wrong, and that it's not likely to go wrong, but if it does, we'll fix it. As opposed to a cardiac surgeon, I remember, who gave the patient a 2-page thing before they went in for heart surgery, which they had to sign off on, describing every possible complication that they could have from the open heart surgery, which was really a toxic thing to give to a patient before the surgery, so that he's off the hook from the point of view of the legal system. So a lot of the doctors are forced under the legal system to do things they don't necessarily want to do, and they just do them by rote now. The other one is statistics, prognosis. Nobody knows what anybody's prognosis is going to be. Only the Creator knows. So to go and rely on a statistic that, Mr. Smith, you should go home and put your affairs in order, you've got 3 months to live, is a medical hex, and that shouldn't actually ever happen. It happens quite frequently, and if the guy has got a Harvard diploma on his wall and he's got the white coat syndrome, it can be really toxic for the patient to really get a prognosis like that. So that type of thing, nocebo has no place in the healing equation. So we talked about the inner healer that has to rely on truth. The patient was responsible for helping his or her own inner healer from healing by accessing the field, accessing the right kind of healers or physicians, and trying to optimize the place. Now, the one thing about the field is if you go and see a psychic or you go and get a divination, you can get a very good idea of some of the denial that somebody's having about the place. How toxic is the home environment? Should they give up their job? That type of thing. Those are all critical things that are really very important for the whole thing. And then the quantum field, which can give us access to some magic. So these medicine models here, the first is the Holy Grail. Allopathic medicine is absolutely incredible. It's totally magical. But we still have patients, and I see them in my office, who come along and they have no trouble using an iPhone, they have no trouble having a car that does everything, maybe even a self-driving car, but they have a problem with doctors and hospitals and medicine, that it's evil and it's bad, and that's what we're going to talk about with regard to denial. Denial of allopathic medicine is as bad as, submitting to witchcraft, really. There's so much magic out there, we have to make use of it. Complementary and alternative medicine, or integrated medicine, was hot, many years ago. It still is, but the word complementary is what's important. It's not instead of, it's as well as. And in fact, when I was very interested in this early on, and I found that a lot of the complementary methods did not stand up to double-blind trials. When you tested them, most of it was placebo, which is okay, because some patients need that placebo effect of the homeopathy or whatever. But when you boil it down to some of the things that really work, Chinese medicine works, but we don't understand it, so maybe it's got not as strong a placebo effect. Acupuncture works well, but not in everything. Energy medicine is very important because that will enhance the inner healer. Meditation, qigong, yoga, all those things are vital. And guided imagery, which we're going to deal with in our meditation in a different way, but guided imagery is very, very important. The sensory aspect of the meditation, the music, and often the visuals that you have are very important with the imagination. So belief, essentially, placebo is a love vibration, and a nocebo is a fear vibration. And I think those are the important thing. If you're getting a sense of discomfort, dis-ease, fear from your healer or the healing team, then you might need to start making some changes. Distant healing, there are numerous double-blind studies now showing that if you take two groups of people, notably they did a very big study of AIDS patients in San Francisco, and there was one very interesting study from a Baptist hospital down south, which was a coronary care unit. You take two groups of patients, comparable groups, and you give the one standard care and the other gets standard care, but they also get distant healing or distant prayer from somebody they don't know. They don't know they're getting the healing, and the people that are doing the healing, the experienced healers, do not know the patient. So it's more than doubly blinded. There's no way the person knows that they've been healed. The results are so startlingly better that if it was a pill and you didn't give it, you'd be negligent for it. But nobody, sometimes people do pray, but it's not common. It's a really important thing that you can tap into either on your own or have people praying for whoever it is that's ailing. This brings us on to the quantum healing type of phenomenon, which can be more shamanic, engaging a shaman, engaging a psychic to try and get more information about things that you're not going to get from the allopathic medicine. But make no mistake, you wouldn't want to be living 100 years ago. We'll have questions later. Sorry, on this one.
What does that stand?
Complementary and alternative medicine, same as integrative medicine. Sorry, should have mentioned that. Fear itself is not a foe, but acquiescing to fear empowers it to be a formidable one. So fear can be good if it motivates people. So fear and truth together are good. So if you've got a guy who metaphorically is climbing Mount Everest, you want them to know that it's Mount Everest. You want to tell them the truth. You want to tell them with hope and look, this is how we're going to handle it. We've got this team. This is what we're going to do. There are going to be a few little hiccups here along the way, but we'll get you through it. You'll be on the top of Mount Everest. End of story. So that the fear that motivates the person to do everything besides what allopathic medicine is giving him or her is very, very important. But if it's debilitating fear, what I call the HAD, H-A-D, caps with periods in between, the hopeless, helpless, head down position, the apathetic, the anxious for the A, and the depressed, dejected, defeated type of attitude, that depresses the immune system and is a problem. And that's when the fear becomes overwhelming and can be debilitating and can be fatal. So this is, Sanford has said, only love can generate the healing power. It's a love vibration, and if you're not getting that from your healer or your doctor or your team, it might be okay for a certain technical problem, because you shouldn't expect your doctor. Sometimes it's going to be a technician rather than a healer. But as long as it's not toxic and it's still supportive, that's fine. Just don't expect too much from the doctor, because it's not fair to the doctor, really. That's not the way things are going for them anymore. Now, to paraphrase the ancestors, all healing is mediated through universal healing energy, which is basically love, through the Creator. Some people are chosen more powerfully to do this. We all have healing abilities, but for some people they are definitely better than other people, and there are some healers that are better than other healers. So in some of these studies, advanced healing techniques were used for the distant healing, so they were very accomplished healers. But we can all heal, and we can all heal others and help others heal. The distant effect is really important as well, from our friends and our loved ones and the community. You want everybody around the person to have a positive vibration and a hopeful vibration. You don't want them to project any sense of despair onto the person, or to be voicing any concerns, when they're not around, because that itself can be harmful. So this is what we're going to talk about, and I can't point, but faith, belief, hope, trust and surrender, these are very high up concepts in a sense that we all know about, but we don't pay enough attention to. You've got all of these on your handout, so you don't have to worry about them. Just put in two columns. Then there's truth, wisdom, and knowledge. The wisdom of truth and the knowledge of truth. The ancestors say information is not to be equated with knowledge. Knowledge is not to be equated with understanding. And understanding is not to be equated with wisdom. So they're all tiers along the same way. We need all of those, but we mustn't disregard the wisdom. Love, empathy, and compassion. Forgiveness. Love actually bumps up the immune system. It increases your immune factors. Cynicism decreases your immune system. So a lot of these things now have been shown by neuroscience that these spiritual things are actually physically measurable. on MRI scans and on immune studies and so on. Forgiveness versus guilt, because guilt is incredibly important. And then gratitude and joy versus grief and the power of laughter. And choice, being able to make good choices, take the right kind of action, and being congruent with not so much your destiny in this case, but your destiny will come later once we're healed, but more congruent with the fact that you're totally committed to the will to live. And we'll talk a lot about that at the end. And then finding meaning in the problem. With every catastrophe, there's a gift. So, one just has to change the way of looking at the whole thing. And many people would say that have been through a terrible thing, they wouldn't have wanted to choose this, but having had it happen to them, they know they're not the same person. They're very grateful for it. It's being able to recognize that part of it. The whole thing is balanced by will and words and the balance of the forces we're going to talk about. And of course, enhancing the life force with energy medicine and also with distant healing effects, which involves a spiritual practice. So when we line it up in two columns, we see there's wisdom versus understanding. The one expands, the one contracts. The understanding is the allopathic medicine. It's great, but it's limited. The right side is more the spiritual side, and the left side is more the allopathic side. There's hope and belief versus hopelessness, which would be a bad prognosis. There's trust and surrender versus resignation. There's truth versus denial. There's love and empathy versus fear. There's forgiveness versus guilt, gratitude versus grief, good optimal choices versus limited choices. Remember that we don't get what we deserve, we get what we pay for in the medical fraternity. So sometimes our choices are limited by budget, which is a sad thing, but it's the truth. People who deserve much more get less. And then congruence as opposed to being a pleaser. You don't want to be a pleaser. You don't want everybody to say, that guy is such a nice patient. He never asks any questions. He just does what we said. Those patients don't do well. You don't want to be an adverse patient, but you want to be able to be in a team relationship with your physician and your healing and be nice about it, but still be congruent with the fact you want to get well. So when I did this Spirit of Healing book, it occurred to me that the Tree of Life was a really good model for what we are talking about. So if you look at the top, because these are very hard things to... Hope, belief, trust, surrender are difficult. They're right up there at the top, and that is about wisdom. Wisdom is undifferentiated thought. It's quantum thinking. It's things that you cannot measure. That Einstein said, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. As opposed to understanding, which is about hopelessness, it's about resignation, it's about denial, and we're going to talk about some of those qualities. And the truth of the diagnosis versus the denial of the diagnosis. And then when you have the next triad, mercy, judgment versus beauty and love, remember that there are 5 loves on the tree. The Keter is connection with the crown, the Godhead, the field. Wisdom is a love, mercy is a love. In the center, beauty, Tiferet is a love, and then non-attachment to the object of your desire, which is also part of trust and surrender, is also a love. So attachment to the object of your desire, kingdom and earth, which is also the place we find ourselves, judgment and understanding are fears or judgments. So the one is an expanding force, the other one is a contracting force. Now when it comes to hope, belief, and especially trust and surrender, we're talking about a trust and surrender that goes beyond understanding. When you come down to the trust and surrender that has to do with ego, I want to give an example of that and an example of what overemphasize on this side can do to somebody. There's a famous story about a Mr. Wright. Some of you may have heard about it. It was some years back. It was before the internet. By the way, the internet is a terrible nocebo. I can't tell you how many patients we have in the office who come in completely spun out. They're sick because they enter the internet and they've been looking up their pain and they've decided they've got some debilitating cancer or something. And it takes a lot of time to get them right when they've got absolutely nothing wrong. So do not go on the internet. Once you have a team of doctors or you have somebody you trust, You can go to particular questions, but be very careful that you're looking up what the doctor tells you have and not what you think you might have. It's an incredibly toxic problem. So there's Mr. Wright, to go back to it. He is admitted to hospital. This is some years ago. Medicine wasn't quite what it used to be. And he was a scientist, very smart guy, had quite a lot of money. And he had terminal lymphoma. So he came in with big lymph glands, fluid in his lungs. He couldn't breathe, a big spleen, big liver. And the whole thing was hopeless. He was ready to die. So the doctors had just heard about a new drug that had been released called Crebiozin. And they came to Mr. Wright and they said, we have this drug available now. It's just been released and there are favorable reports about Crebiozin. Would you like us to give it to you? And he'd heard about it because he read everything that he could. He was absolutely obsessive about his disease. He said, absolutely, because he'd heard it was great. So they gave him Crebiozin and he had the most incredible response. His lymph glands just disappeared. The fluid around his lungs just went away. He was walking around the ward where before he was on oxygen. And he left the hospital. He was wealthy. He flew his own plane home without oxygen. Complete remission. And the doctors were astounded at this. It happened over a period of days. So then results came to surface that maybe Crebiozin wasn't as good as it should have been. And he read everything that he could. He was really noceboing himself. So within a week, he was back in the hospital with exactly the same thing that he had before. And the doctors were even more astounded, And he had a team, and I think there was a psychologist on board. I think his name was Klopfer. And they came back to him, and they said to Wright, sir, we understand now that the Crebiozin we got wasn't really the best preparation. They've now got a fortified, more concentrated preparation. And they've just sent us the new batch. And if you had such an amazing response to the first one, this should do it for you, because you had a complete remission. So they gave him the Crebiozin, but they didn't give him Crebiozin. They gave him a placebo. And he had the same response on nothing. He had no medicine. He was absolutely ecstatic. He left the hospital, and he's just happy as could be. And then, of course, he's following all the journals, and a report came out about a month or two later from the AMA saying that Crebiozin was totally useless, and within a week he was dead. So what we're trying to say here is that kind of stuff, ignorance sometimes is bliss. You do want to know, but once you know and you know the truth, you also have to trust and surrender to a lower level, to the medical team. He had that trust, but it was only in science. And look what that got him. If he would not have read anything, he might have been alive today. We see some of that in our practice. So we're going to be talking about these polarities a little bit more. So let's look at wisdom. Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. What we know in medicine is the truth in the gospel of today becomes, you just let it go and you find something new, and that's always better. So medicine is always changing. Evidence-based medicine is not really evidenced. We think it's evidence because maybe it shows some improvement, but it's always changing and it's always shifting. And we have guidelines now which you feel committed to adhere to, because the guidelines are great, but they do tell you, use your clinical judgment. These are just guidelines. But if something goes wrong with the patient and you haven't followed the guidelines, you could be up for a lawsuit. So those guidelines are pretty rigid, and they take away a lot of the intuition and the clinical judgment of some of the doctors. So evidence-based medicine is not so evidence, but we, because we sometimes are a little bit arrogant, we start to begin to think that we have the answer to everything, and we don't. So these are some of the polarities. Wisdom is really about knowing as opposed to knowledge, information, understanding. Understanding is evidence-based medicine, and understanding can be wrong. Rules can be wrong. Then there's the placebo and the field effect, which is having the wisdom to know there's something else beyond there. And there's evidence-based medicine. Then there's intuition and spacious mind, big mind, as opposed to data, narrow mind, and so on. There's sense versus facts. Not everything that makes sense is logical, and not everything that's logical makes sense. And sometimes we sort of get influenced not only by the medical establishment, but by our hopes for the patient. For instance, grandma is in bed and the oncologist comes to grandma and says, we can give you 3 months more to live, and she's already 85. But there are some side effects, and this is the one time they tend to play down the problem. You might lose your hair, and you might vomit, and you might have to admit you for antibiotics and so on. And you think, does that make sense? Do I really want to live 3 months? I'd rather have a better quality of life. But then you get this other thing called palliative care and hospice, which can be a nocebo effect. So we have to be very careful. The family often want to give the old lady the benefit of the doubt. The oncologist obviously doesn't want to admit defeat. So we have something that doesn't really make sense, but there are facts to back it up. So what about hope, belief, and trust versus prognosis? Transformation versus information? Healing versus curing? And connecting with the higher self versus being driven to be attached to what's going to happen. I'm going to get better. That's all good, but there is something about non-attachment that you must strive to do everything possible, at the same time not be too attached to it, as we'll see a bit later. So if you look at the middle here, these two poles, the left and right, the positive and the negative, the expansion and contraction, are balanced in the middle by will, by words, and by faith. Words are really important, incredibly important. Imagination and guided imagery is incredibly important. And the will to live is incredibly important. We know this from these amazing stories you hear about survivors, even animals, They just have this will to live that makes them supervene against all odds. It's almost like the field or the creator or the spirit guides or the ancestors are looking down and saying, wow, just look how this person is trying. Let's do everything we can to help them. So passion and courage and will are incredibly important. But remember that there were 4 trees of life. There wasn't one. When the Creator created the universe, there were 4 trees. The first tree was emanation, which is up there, which is the Word. In the beginning was the Word. The second tree was the tree of creation, which was the plan, the blueprint. So if you look at this room, this lovely place, first the Word, let's make a nice auditorium. Let's get the architect, that's the creation. And then let's get the contractor, that's the formation. So the formation was really the elements coming together, and then there was the actualization, the 4th tree of life, where it actually happened and it was created in so many epochs, doubtly, maybe in days, but maybe in epochs. So every single medical plan or any plan at all, it's important to honor the 4 stages. First the word, then the plan, then get all the medical team together and finally do it. And be flexible about it, because you might have to change teams every now and again if you're not happy. Now these faith, belief, hope, trust, surrender all sound a little bit similar, but there are subtle distinctions between them. Faith is blind. You don't need evidence for faith. Faith has a shadow side, because on the one hand, you've got to keep your brain in your head and not let it fall out, because too much faith can, if you're relying only on faith and you're not having any allopathic backup for it, that's a bad mistake. But faith, if you've got everything going, faith, you'll see, is an incredibly powerful thing. Belief depends on evidence, and I'll give you an instance for myself. When I was told many, many times in South Africa that my ancestors were calling me to be a shaman, I did not believe it. So it's okay if you don't believe something, but you mustn't disbelieve in it. Because if you disbelieve in it, then you let it go and you ignore it. It's okay to doubt, but you have to trust. It's not a paradox. It's, you can have both. So I didn't disbelieve in it, but I didn't really believe in it. And then I went and I found a teacher, thinking fully, I'm a left brain surgeon, I'm not going to get this. I'm not going to get this at all. It's a shamanic thing. And over the period of 2 years, I saw the evidence change as I was taught things. And I was very cynical and very left-brained about it. But I could see whatever I was being taught was true. Some of the things I knew to be true were confirmed, and many things I didn't believe to be true became true. And most of all, I found that I could do this, and then I believed in it. But I required the evidence. Different to faith would have been blind faith going there, and I might have been disappointed. So it's important to know the distinctions between them. So let's look at what people cleverer than me have said. This is William Osler, who was a doctor who lived in a time when we didn't have the allopathic medicine that they have now. Faith was incredibly important, and the other factors, all of the factors that I'm talking about now, are what did it. And when you go to indigenous societies, they do pretty well with placebo and with distant healing and with faith in the doctor, because the placebo effect by the shaman is enhanced by magic, by incredibly phenomenal things they do, handling fire. I remember one bushman I once saw in a trance who had his foot in the fire for long enough to sustain a major third-degree burn, and when he came out of trance, I looked at his foot, it was completely normal. And then I said, "Did you see me in the trance?" And he said, "Yes, I did." I said, "Am I okay?" He says, "You're very healthy." To me, that was as good as an MRI and a full workup. I didn't need to see any doctors after that, because you see the magic of this guy. So faith is sometimes is improved by these magical things or by the charisma of your healer. But faith in gods or spirits cures one. Faith in little pills another. Hypnotic suggestion a third. Faith in a plain common doctor a fourth. Faith in whatever you have faith in. For instance, with Wright, it was faith in science works. Faith can be a con guy who comes to town, a con faith healer. And because you're gullible and you're ignorant and you're innocent and you really believe in this person, you can be cured, even though the guy has no power, just by the measure of faith. It doesn't have to be true. And this is what he's saying here. The faith with which we work has its limitations, such as we find it, but faith is the most precious commodity, without which we would be very badly off. Remember, in the old days, it was very much a balance of things. Tuberculosis was usually a death sentence, but if you had good care and you had good nutrition and you could go to a sanitarium or maybe go to a better climate and you had the right kind of loving thing, you could find a balance where you could live out your life with the tuberculosis. Kind of like a lot of Africans in Africa are living with malaria. They have remissions and relapses. Faith can change that into a complete cure, as we will see. Doesn't happen often, but it happens. The power of prayer, this is from the ancestors, is greater than the power of prophecy, and therein is where healing is to be found. Well, I'm talking about the power of prophecy being the prognosis. The power of prayer is stronger than the power of the oncologist telling you about the prognosis. So there's a story about Isaiah the prophet. He came to a chieftain. Now Isaiah talked to God, so he was a very powerful prophet. And he said to the chieftain, "I'm sorry, sir, that you don't have very long to live. Put your affairs in order." And the chieftain took him to task. The chieftain was a big guy, a big deal. And he said, "You're a prophet, you're a man of God. You're supposed to give me hope. You're supposed to tell me good things, not to come and tell me," I'm sure he didn't know about nocebo, but he understood what nocebo was. And he prayed to God and he lived another 15 years. So that's a famous story about somebody like Isaiah who comes to you and say you're going to die, and that turns around, then you don't have to believe your oncologist. So the one thing you need to be in denial of is the prognosis. Don't listen to statistics. Don't let your friends, your loved ones listen to statistics. Don't even ask ever for statistics, because they can be really powerful nocebos. Hope is about believing in spite of the evidence. A little bit about like belief. And then watching the evidence change. So hope and belief kind of work together. If you don't believe in something, you're never going to see it. The Native Americans never saw the ships that brought them such catastrophe when the pilgrims came to land in America, because they had no construct for what a ship was. So obviously when the ship was closer, they saw it. But these are people who notice things, but they kind of blotted it out because there was no construct for that thing. Once you have a construct and you have hope and belief, that's important. He is the best physician who is the most ingenious inspirer of hope. The team that took care of Mr. Wright were incredibly inspiring, for the hope story. But Mr. Wright actually screwed it up. Surrender is a giving in, and it's a giving in to yourself. Surrender is not waving the white flag. That's resignation. That's a giving up. And giving into yourself can make way later on to a giving of yourself. For instance, the woman who has breast cancer and comes through an ordeal and actually cures herself from a very bad cancer that has a poor prognosis, and has given into herself in that moment, being completely committed. Once she's cured, can then give of herself in the heroine's journey by becoming a wounded healer that's gone through all this, and then helping other women who've got breast cancer. So surrender has two aspects to it: giving into something much bigger than yourself, and then eventually when you prevail, you become the heroine or the hero of your story, and then you start to give of yourself. So surrender is a different quality. It's giving into the field, to the Tao, to other forces, to something that's much bigger than yourself. It's connecting with your higher self rather than the ego. It's being in the flow. It's being flexible, adaptable, because you don't know, things are going to change. There are too many variables, and each variable has free will, so one has to be flexible and adaptable. It's not taking no action. It's taking action, but let the allopathic team take care of that, and you take care of the rest of it, or let the patient take care of the rest of it. Like I said before, if for nothing else, this has to do with spiritual transformation. Resignation is a giving up. It's kind of the couch potato HAD, H-A-D, syndrome. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm just going to sit on my couch, eat Doritos, and drink beer, and watch bad television. That's really, really a bad situation. I had a friend who once said, ever since I gave up hope, I feel much better. So there's something nice about resignation and giving up hope. It's like, well, there's nothing I can do, and then you sort of feel comfortable in that zone. Don't have to do anything. It's a very, very passive situation, but it's not a good thing. Now, forgiveness. Let's see how we're doing with time. Forgiveness is so important. I'm going to talk about mainly self-forgiveness here because it's a big subject in its own. But Alan Paton, who was a South African, this is way before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but he said, when a deep injury is done to us, we never recover or heal until we forgive. So we now know that if you take patients with AIDS, patients who got the AIDS virus, that have forgiven the person who gave them the virus, do much better than patients who did not. They have higher T-cell counts, they live much longer. So forgiveness is really important in bumping up the immune system. Guilt and shame, on the other hand, depress the immune system because they increase pro-inflammatory factors like your white blood cells and your C-reactive protein and your cytokines and your interleukins and all these fancy things, your tumor necrotic factors and so on. Those create inflammation, and we know that inflammation now creates a lot of autoimmune diseases, many cancers, and even hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis. Sugar is something that creates inflammation. So guilt has no place in the healing paradigm whatsoever. So let's look a little bit about forgiveness. To err is human, to forgive divine. So forgiveness is very good karma. You clean the slate, you sort of you leave without any unfinished business. We all do bad things, but that doesn't make us bad. Remorse and regret is when we feel bad about what we did. We're not so serious. We can make amends, we can apologize, we can fix it, and we can move on. Shame, guilt, self-condemnation are very much more powerful. Shame, the most powerful of all. Shame is a crippling emotional force that can really hamper the inner healer, can cause soul sickness, can cause soul loss, in fact. There's a saying by a yogi that self-condemnation is the biggest impediment on the spiritual path, but it's also one of the biggest impediments on the healing path. So a lot of people with religious convictions, convictions of hell and damnation if you sin and all the rest of it, have a lot of guilt about what they do. And we all do bad things. And if you have guilt and shame, it actually makes things worse. You go in a downward spiral. It doesn't improve anything at all. But what they've shown now with functional MRI scans is shame and guilt put the brain in lockdown mode. It shuts you off from your prefrontal lobe, from your higher centers, which are your big mind, your spacious mind, your notions, your concepts, the things we're talking about. And it puts all the activity in the primitive brain. Puts you in freeze, feign death mode. Remember, the survival response is fight or flight, but it's also freeze and feign death. So your brain goes into lockdown and you sort of get paralyzed, and that's not good for healing. So, the ancestors say God is not a test of love. God's love is not a test. So for folks who have these belief systems that God is punishing them because of what they've done, there's no merit in that. There's no truth to it. That's not what happens. That's why we have karma. We have the law of cause and effect. But it doesn't happen like that. It happens in other ways, especially when you go over to the other side. So there's no place for shame or guilt. Redemption is absolute and can happen and should happen in order for one to heal. Now, this is coming from more the indigenous side. Guilt and illness and self-forgiveness, or what they call universal self-acceptance, USA, universal self-acceptance, is really important. But I know from indigenous societies that if you have a curse that's put on somebody and it's associated with guilt, it's going to be much more powerful. So, all of us who've worked in the field know of a young, healthy African who will come and he'll say, I'm going home to die, and you'll take him to your best doctor to show him that he's not sick. He'll have a full workup and everything will turn out normal. And he'll say, no, I'm going home to die. He won't tell his white boss why, because he's going to think he's stupid. You're going to say, you're stupid, you believe in witchcraft. So he says, no, I'm sick, I'm going home to die. And then a few months later you get a note, that Johannes died and thank you for taking care of him, or something like that. That's witchcraft associated with guilt. He's probably done something really bad. Maybe he stole another person's wife or screwed somebody over in business, or maybe even killed somebody. And he knows he's guilty, and he knows witchcraft works, and he knows he's been bewitched, because in indigenous societies you don't go to lawyers, can't afford them, So you go to a witch and it works. And that's the essence of the guilt, as well as the curse, is much more powerful. So if you curse yourself by having guilt and shame because of something you've done, and you really believe that God is not a test of, is a test of love, and He's punishing you, that's going to be a problem for you. So we can help people sort of, fix those kind of concepts and get rid of them. Playing and telling of old tape stories, reruns, you become the story. We don't have time to talk about the subconscious, the power of the subconscious. But Coué, the Frenchman, who first started this whole thing about every day in every way I'm getting better and better. It's a very powerful mantra. That's what we need to program the subconscious with. The patient who is always rerunning his story again and again about what happened and how terrible the chemotherapy was and all the rest of it is actually punishing themselves, because whatever you say with words is being recorded by your subconscious all the time. And your subconscious will decide what happens to you, not your conscious mind. So we have to program our conscious mind with our subconscious mind. It's done best around sleep. It's done best in a meditative state to keep the power of positive thinking. There is truth to the positive thinking. Every day in every way I'm getting better and better. If you're having a bad reaction to the chemo, that's the mantra to say. Not to go to your friends and start telling them all about the story, because it takes, of course, an interest and it becomes more a victim, the had mode. Not a good thing. Unless you can do it with laughter. If you can do it with laughter and you can change it all around, it's a whole different paradigm. And that's why it's very good to watch these comedians with all the political stuff. It's a way of looking at the doom and gloom and laughing about it, and that bumps up your immune system. It increases your endorphins. Nothing increases your endorphins more than a belly laugh. If you really are almost wetting your pants, your immune system is really going up. If you wet your pants, you're in good shape. So I'm going to play this meditation now, and then we'll take a quick break. But here are the words to the song, which are all from the ancestors. And it's kind of interesting because I chose the song. I didn't know how appropriate the ancestors' words were for all these things. It's about the guided imagery. Imagination allows the vision. Intent sustains its potential. Acting with trust manifested. To think like God is to imagine. Einstein had incredible imagination, and he said he wanted to understand the mind of God, and he got pretty close to it, but he knew he never would, but he was striving ways to understand the mind of God. As you think it, so it can be. As you imagine it and believe it, so it can be. Imagination greatly affects our lives, and also we must conjure our thoughts carefully and caringly. Very, very important, because the thoughts we have create words, and the words program our subconscious. So I'm going to play the song, but I want to just give you one sort of method a simple method of getting into a situation where you can imagine something different. And you can use this not for anything you want today, or for nothing at all if you want, and just meditate. But the first thing is to get into an altered state of consciousness, get into the field. This is easily done around sleep. So the ancestors really say the best time to put these things in around sleep, because your conscious mind is on hold around sleep, your conscious mind is on hold around deep meditation. So get into a meditative state or do it around sleep. Put your intention, your desire into the field with imagination and with detail. Detail is really important because the free will is the cosmic law. And then let go of any attachment to the outcome, because attachment has a stickiness to it, which in a way, if you're too attached to it, it's telling your subconscious you don't believe it's going to happen, and that'll refute the whole thing. And then let the universe handle the details. Simple stuff, but not easy to do and not easy to be effective. Okay, well, let's finish off, because I want to, as I said, leave time for questions. So let's look at the high-tech thing and what have we lost. Obviously we've gained a tremendous amount, of magic. Allopathic medicine is unbelievable. What's going on now. But we've also lost a lot along the way, and that's what we want to also look at from a slightly different point of view than what we've been talking about. And I want to talk about a very ancient, old concept, the healer-patient, doctor-patient relationship, the bedside manner, which has kind of been replaced by a computer, and high-tech stuff. So if we think about the bedside manner, why was it called bedside? Because usually the old-time doctor used to see the patient in their bed at home. They were sick at home. So he or she knew the family constellation, the work constellation, was also kind of a priest and a psychologist and all the rest of it at the same time, and knew much more about the place than maybe the modern day doctor knows. You see somebody in the office and things are kind of changed here. Now, what about choice? Well, we don't have too much choice, none of us, in fact, unless we're really wealthy and we can kind of hop in our Learjet and fly to the Mayo Clinic and get the best treatment for one particular problem, where the guy there is probably the best in the world. Not many of us can do that. Now we have what's called the provider. You're given a provider. And I want to talk about how the doctor-patient relationship has been demeaned by big medicine and big pharmacy and the government and managed care and insurance companies and the pharmaceutical company and so on. If you look up provider, the word provider, it says pimp, panderer, purveyor, procurer, hustler. That's what I've become. I'm a hustler, So what kind of a message does that give? Even though maybe we think of provider as being a neutral term, it's really not a neutral term. It's a demeaning term. In reality, these days, the tail is wagging the dog. The doctors have no say in what's going on. The patients have no say. And of course, it's always one or the other's fault rather than, big money. we're getting shafted. That's why I like Bernie Sanders. We're the only country in the world that doesn't have a national health service, and it's tragic. We should at least have that. Then we have evidence-based medicine, and I've mentioned to you before, it's not so evidence-based. And then we had electronic medical records. This was going to be a panacea where, your doctor could know everything about you. He would be able to tap into the other doctor. You can't do that. It was a fable. And the doctor's offices do not speak to each other. Not everybody has electronic medical records. And it's true that Cottage Health Systems has Epic system, which is epic. It's really about the best you can get. And everything is centralized. So in Santa Barbara, we're actually very fortunate because you can get Epic in San Inez Hospital, you can get it at Galileo Valley Hospital, and it's incredibly powerful, and it even has access to outside information, but it's usually pretty sketchy unless they've got the Epic or it's been fed into the system. So you cannot get something from Hawaii or certainly not from Canada, certainly not from Germany. There's no way you're going to get that information. So it's a bit of a hoax, quite honestly, not to mention that the poor doctors who signed in for it thinking they'd get $40,000, very few of them got it because they could not fulfill the criteria. Everything that you do takes, I would say, 5 times as long as it used to. What used to take you 5 minutes now takes you 30 minutes. Takes you away from the patient, takes the nurses away from the patient and the patient care. The Florence Nightingale syndrome is gone. They don't have any time to put hands on or to give them a wash or to give them a back rub or maybe to do a bit of Reiki on them or something that they used to do in the old days. So there's a good part to it. I think the good part from the business point of view is they can track the money. And that's what it's all about. And they can see, what's going on with the provider, if the provider's up to something or not. The old days where we would have morbidity and mortality sessions where doctors would sit down and talk about the problems they had and learn stuff, now you get a computer printout. Acceptable performance, unacceptable performance. Why you didn't follow the guidelines even if the patient did well. It's just, it's become really problematic, very impersonal. So now we have doctors suffering because they're getting home late at night, they're spending a lot of time on the computer, they had to put on PAs, they have to have scribes, there's extra cost, and the doctor is really under the gun. So I think it's important when you think about the team approach to recognize that the doctor is looking at the screen all the time, and maybe because he's in a kind of situation of a clinic where he has got 10 minutes for a new patient, he doesn't have the time to have a bedside manner. It's not necessarily his or her fault anymore. But I must say, I do get complaints that people say, he never touched me, he never examined me, and all he did was look at his computer. And that's a problem, it's really a problem. I don't know what we can do about it. The PAs are often very, very good, but, there is a gift and a skill to taking a good history as opposed to filling it out on a computer. When you have a personal interaction with a patient and you're a little bit intuitive, and a lot of people don't, and a lot of doctors are, even though they wouldn't say they are, you get a different sense of them, and your history may take on a completely different form to what the scribe is going to write, to what the computer is going to say. So a lot of clinical stuff is going out the window, and I think that's kind of tragic. Yes, it's been compensated for by advancements in science, but we have to try and find a way to get both. Telemedicine, is great if you're in the boondocks and you have no access to doctors, but relying on a computer to give you all the information can be a problem. Not to mention now we have what's called My Chart, which I think is a problem because the patients don't know what their chart's about. I'll give you an example. I had a patient once who had a urinalysis, and she had My Chart through, I think, the Sansom thing. And she called desperate. She said, I've got hyaline casts in my urine. I need to see a nephrologist. And I said, no, you don't. Those are normal. But she said, there's a red mark next to it. It can't be normal. I must be dying. Because it's like going into the cockpit of an aeroplane and you see a red thing and you think, oh my God, we're going to crash. And then you're starting to bother the pilot instead of allowing him to do his job. So there are some serious problems, not to mention robotic surgery, which is amazing because you can do a surgery in New York and it can, I mean, on a console, and the person can be in India. I mean, that's incredibly space-age medicine. Radiation therapy is incredibly advanced. The whole thing has changed. It's like cyber technology. So there are goods, but there are also bads, and I think it's really important. The most important thing, there's tremendous physician burnout because of these impositions. They demean. Our costs have slowly been decreasing for the last 20 years. You know, for a surgery, that sometimes we're getting 25% now of what we used to charge many years ago. And the patients are getting screwed. And of course, the managed care, the CEOs are declaring huge bonuses every year, millions of dollars. The CEOs of hospitals, there isn't one of them that's getting less than $1 million, I can guarantee you. I think there was somebody back east who was getting $30 million a year. So where's that money going in terms of patient care at the hospital, you know? So we are in a consumer society, and everybody doesn't want any socialism. But sometimes, it's a bad word that's not really that bad because it's not really socialism. It's just common sense that we've got to do something. I think most doctors would say to you today, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't do medicine. The new doctors of today, for them it's a 9-to-5 job. They check in, they check out, they don't take their patients home. I'm not saying it's not a calling for them, but for some of them it's not. It's just a job. And they're happy to check out at the end of the day, even if they've got a complicated medical problem, that they hand over for the weekend to somebody who may not really understand what's going on, and things could go wrong. So I'm not trying to scare you or anything, but I mainly want to give you a sense that have some compassion for the physician, because he's under the gun, she's under the gun all the time. Suicide rate in doctors is going up. In certain specialties, it's rampant. So there's something very, very wrong. The calling has become, completely polluted. So this is a problem that we all have to face, but it's good to know because it takes into account what you have to deal with in the office, maybe gives you more sympathy. It's really important, the reception you get at the front, that's really, especially if you've got a bad problem. And I must say, when you go to centers of excellence and oncology units, they're very good at most of this. And in Santa Barbara included, they have meditations, they have yoga, they have qigong, they have all sorts of things that are very, very good. So they understand a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about and try their best to obviate it. So we talked a little bit about laughter, joy, and as counteracting to grief, and we've also talked a bit about it when we talked about counteracting dark forces. Love, laughter, and light are what we need to bring in healing and in spiritual work. There's Norman Cousins wrote a book called Anatomy of an Illness, where he cured himself by watching funny movies and watching candid camera. It really does help, so we can all take a lesson from that. That we have to not get down too much, and this is, we're talking about healing here. We're not necessarily talking about cancer, so we can all heal ourselves by finding gratitude and joy and laughter in hidden recesses wherever we can find it. It does bump up the immune system. So I want to end off with these healing outcomes, because it's important to recognize what the possibilities are. Firstly, there's remission, which is balancing the scales, and then there's relapse. Now, what's changed now is the whole landscape has changed. We're seeing more and more patients who are in remission. We're seeing more and more patients who relapse and then are in remission because of all the incredible advances: immunotherapy, stem cells, genetic counseling, cyber knife type of radiation technology, which is space age. And a lot of patients now that, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, are living with their disease, often at great expense, often not covered by insurance, but when it is covered, they're living with terrible things. I know one doctor, in fact, who's got malignant melanoma, who's doing great. He had metastases to his brain, and they removed part of it, they radiated the rest, and he's out kite surfing. And this is now 2 or 3 years. 10 years ago, he would have been done for. So everything, the whole landscape has changed. All the rules are now changing because, we used to think of metastases as being we never want to talk about a death sentence because there's always chemotherapy. But now there's targeted therapy and all sorts of fancy radiation where, the PET scan will show you exactly where the little tumor is that you could never find before, and you can irradiate it with a cyber knife, and these patients not necessarily are cured, but they are living longer and longer and maybe dying with their disease, not from their disease. So I think it's important to know this, because sometimes we're stuck in the old paradigms of what used to be when there's a completely new paradigm out there now. And that's it's much more a question of, oh yes, you're in remission, you'll be in remission a long time, and if you have a relapse, don't worry, because we've got another 6 things down the pike and new ones are coming that we can help you with. Then of course there's progression and there's death, but death is never a bad thing. The Zohar says, this world is only preparation for the next world. This is 1% of what there is. What out there beyond is 99%. So we're all in the process of dying. Our shelf life here is expiring, especially for some of us more than others with the grey hair. And we know that, what's important is how you die. There's a yoga saying that says, when you came into the planet, everybody laughed and you cried. You're sure that when you leave, that they're crying and you laughing, and that's the plan. So a woman who's dying, an extremist, but it waits 3 weeks for her kids to arrive from some far-off place, and rallies at the last moment, and is normal until they leave, and then passes out. That's sheer will, and that's important. Or the grandma who lasts another 4 months so she can be at her son's wedding. Often just sheer will, it shouldn't happen. So that will is important, and that's where spontaneous remission comes in. Being healed and not cured, I'm going to talk about at the end. So spontaneous remission is like water running uphill. It doesn't happen. It should not happen. Doctors say this is anecdotal, ignore it, it's so rare that don't even pay attention to it. And they're right in that, don't pay attention and don't let it. Most of us will not have spontaneous remissions if we have a problem, but it's good to look at what are the qualities of people who have had spontaneous remission. And work has been done at Lourdes, which is very commendable, by the Vatican, where they appointed a medical commission, and they've got stringent criteria, and they now, it may not be up to date, but when I last looked, there were 69 cases described of spontaneous remissions of terrible diseases that had defied the best of what medicine had to offer them. They had the pre-Lourdes facts, and they had the results after that. And I'm sure there are many, many, many more that, for one reason or another, they never came back for follow-up, they never fulfilled the criteria. Spontaneous remission is real. And Carlyle and Hirschberg wrote 2 books on it, which are with Noetic Sciences, that I actually included when I did my book. They're not out of date because the principles apply. But let's look at some of the principles that I, after reading through these 2 books, came to. The will to live, very important. A fighting spirit, having goals that have to be finished. If you look at Nazi survivors, it wasn't the tough people who survived. It was the people who were able to have a goal, have something to live for. They wanted to see their child again. They wanted to write a book. They were able to see the light in the dark, maybe a sunset, or maybe even to see the light in some of their tormentors, that they weren't all completely evil or terrible. So will, courage, passion are real important, and we said that's what is in the center of that tree. Trust, surrender. And this is having trust in your medical team, which is at the one end, and of course having trust and surrendering to something that's much bigger than themselves. Of all the things, I've put it in pink there, is faith and a spiritual belief, not necessarily a religious belief, but at Lourdes, obviously, it was a Christian religious belief, that all would be well. The one overwhelming factor about some of these patients, when you talk to them, they just have an inner knowing that they're going to be fine. I'll give you an example. I had a patient, he was an artist in town, actually quite a good one. He was in his 80s, and he came into the office once. He said, I've just come back from my gastroenterologist. He's a very competent guy, actually. I know him, very good doctor. And he said, I've got the worst kind of liver cancer. I probably won't last 2 months. He says he's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm going to be fine. You don't say that unless you really believe it. I saw him, I think, several years later. He looked just great, and he probably died of old age. And even if he didn't, he still defied his prognosis because he had this inner knowing of what was going to happen with him. That's hard for most of us to obtain, especially with our rational brains. Then there's love and support, which is really important, and support systems are really important. People who have a congregation, a church, a sangha, they do better. A loving spouse, a loving family, they do better. Even a pet to go home to, they do better. Some years back, Spiegel, a psychiatrist at Stanford University, decided to really see if support groups made any difference. He was kind of skeptical about it. So he took a bunch of women who had breast cancer and again divided them into comparable groups. One group had support group, the other one had no support group. All the women, when the trial closed, in the support group were alive, and most of the women in the non-support group had died. So support is incredibly important. Love is incredibly important. To be a good healer, you have to love everybody no matter what you think about them. So, I think that's really important. To have an unconditional positive regard for your patients or for your, whoever you're dealing with. Fear, and I've got a hyphen there, less. It's not about no fear. A little bit of fear is good. It's about fearing less, having no stress, using techniques, spiritual practice, yoga, qigong to get out of stress. Don't listen to people who've got bad messages. You might have to get rid of some friends. I'm astonished sometimes at what people tell me. Is that, I told one of my really close friends I was going in for surgery, and the first thing he told me, I had a friend who went and had that surgery. He had the most tragic, and he goes into all the details of what his friend had. I mean, if you have somebody like that who's your friend, you best avoid him because you don't want to be hearing anything like that. No stress whatsoever. Choice and congruence, like, the mother who always doted on her children might have to make the choice between her health and being with her children long term versus, not being well. So finding a support system where the kids can be taken to school and she can meditate, or her significant other can do all the chores and do the cooking so she can go and have acupuncture or have a massage. Congruent with the fact that you want to be in control, you are committed, you want to get well. The will to live is incredibly powerful. We see this time and time again in these global catastrophes as well. Action, taking action and finding new meaning in the problem, turning the shit into manure in a sense. Like I said, many of the people would not have chosen to have the problem, but having had it, they can look at the gift that's behind it. And that occurs to any tragedy, including what happened in Montecito. Now, I can't speak really because I'm fine, I live on the mesa. But yesterday I took a hike up San Ysidro, and the whole landscape has changed. It's spectacular. It's unbelievable. I thought, oh my goodness, all the trails are gone. It's absolutely stunning, some of the things. You see things you never saw before. You're like in another country, another world. It's like it's unreal. Just to be able to see that there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. If you've had a prior rite of passage, if you've been up Everest one time, you can do it more easily the next time. So folks who've been through something arduous before, some trial of initiation, are going to do better. For instance, say maybe somebody who survived the death camps, probably be a breeze for them. So let's just end off with how does this work? So if you look at the data from Lourdes, clearly the doctors who were appointed by the Vatican never knew what the Kundalini is, and we've had talks about Kundalini. Most of these people were having some kind of a Kundalini experience. And it was mostly experienced as heat, vibration, tingling, burning fire in the chest, burning heat in the abdomen, weird things that they couldn't really explain. Peak experiences, oneness experiences, mother coming to one of them and saying, don't worry, you're going to be fine. Shamanic-like experiences where they'd been to shamans, maybe even taken mind-altering substances where they could get out of their monkey mind into another reality. heat was one, and vibration was one of the main ones, so much so there was a guy called Cooley many years ago who noticed this phenomenon of people having spontaneous remissions and describing some sort of heat phenomenon. So he thought it was something in the serum he could isolate. So he took their serum and he worked with it, and he spun it down, and he started to give it to patients thinking that whatever it was in the serum was creating this was magical. Of course it didn't work because it was an effect, not the cause of the problem. The cause is a spiritual realignment in some way of the DNA. Medicine works by killing the bad stuff and allowing, hopefully, the good stuff that's left to recover. This is a complete remodeling that's impossible to explain. Now, the DNA is a helix, it's a spiral. And if you look at the sun and moon channels that rotate around the central channel of the spine, they go in a spiral. As above, so below. As is the atom, so is the cell. As is the cell, so is the universe. So something is happening to this energy, to this DNA, that's making it plastic. I mean, DNA we know is plastic, and it's remodeling itself, and holes in the bone are disappearing. When you see the X-ray, gone. Tumors disappearing. Faith is one of the most important things around it, but there's clearly a spiritual power that's going on that has to do with what the Zulus would call umbelini, what the Bushmen would call num, and what the Taoists might call chi, prana in the yoga system. There's something in kundalini or moya in Zulu, or umbelini in Zulu. So this is a magical force. It comes by grace. Faith seems to be the catalyst, and we can't explain it, but it is there. And it's good to think of these polarities because all of them apply to your spiritual practice and your transformational practice as well. So I love this saying, for every ailment under the sun, there's a cure or there's none. Now, we've been talking about both. There's a cure or there is none. Remember that you can be cured and not healed. And if you're cured and not healed, there's quite a good likelihood that you're going to get some other illness later on because of the vibrational discordance you have in your body. Now, shamans say we go to the root of the problem. They will go to the root cause of what started all this, which is probably energetic sometimes, not always. We don't know, like I said. But we are, as doctors, we treat the effect. We've got to go to the root cause. You can be cured and not healed. Everybody can be healed. And if you are healed and you're on this path, it's much more likely that you're going to be cured or even be in remission and live out your life, and maybe live with whatever problem you have. So there it is. For every ailment under the sun, there's a cure or there is none. If there be one, try to find it. If there be none, strive not to mind it. So it's a head trip in a sense, and that's really what we're talking. Somebody mentioned psychosomatic energy medicine. All of these things are really important in not minding it, in surrendering to something that's much bigger than the thing. So I think before we go to the next meditation, let's take some questions, and then hopefully we'll have time for the meditation at the end. Yeah.
You had mentioned something, it sounded sort of adverse when you were talking about the hospice and the set of placebo, the nocebos,
Yeah.
and I haven't had to experience hospice myself, but I understand that it can be a very useful thing in making people comfortable and giving them somebody to be with, and there's a lot of positives, but you sounded, why were you making it say it was a
No, thanks for bringing that up. It's very positive, but for some people, and I know of a few instances, hospice is, I know one woman in particular who was doing just great until one person came and said, now it's time to put you in hospice. She was dead a week later. And I knew her very well, and I knew it would never have happened unless the person had that conversation. For some people, they want to be at home, and hospice is just another way. It's a door to the other side. Palliative care and hospice are great when you're in the hospital and you have somebody like what's his name, who's fantastic. His name Michael Kearney. He's an incredible doctor. He's fantastic. somebody like that comes to see you in the hospital and there's no place for you to go, palliative care will find a place with hospice, or you'll go home and hospice will come. But for some people, hospice is great, palliative care is great, but for some not. I think that's the whole thing about this tree. Sometimes the right side is good, sometimes the left side's better. You have to balance the polarities. So you're absolutely right, they are good things, but I think there are individuals that when they hear certain words, their impression of what's going to happen is, they might have lived a lot longer. Not that it matters, maybe.
Yeah, there you go. So, she made a choice, perhaps. Oh, well, then I think I'll go.
Yeah, but that's where the words come in. That's where whoever's saying something. If you've got somebody like Kearney, then you're in good shape. But if you've got somebody who's from hospice, who's been assigned to come and talk to you, and they give you a hex, that's not good. So all of this depends on the circumstances. Both sides are true. The opposite is true. But I'm just saying that it can be not such a good thing for some people who really want to die at home. Yeah.
We are bombarded with pharmaceutical ads on TV.
Yeah.
And what is always interesting is the comments that it may not solve the problem and may even create worse problems.
Yeah. Well, that's the good thing about whoever decided. We're the only country in the world who can advertise medicine on TV. But at least they get the caveat where they have to describe every single possible complication. So that's the good thing about it. I don't agree with what's happening, but I think Americans are very educated because they know the latest thing that's coming out. Sometimes it's good that, there's certain drugs that are really, really good, and maybe the oncologist hasn't thought about it, or the doctor hasn't thought about it, and the patient comes and says, well, what about this drug, And then, they give it to them and it works. Because the side effects are pretty bad, but they're rare. It's the same thing as going to the internet. I've got patients who won't take antibiotics because they read the side effects, but they're rare. Most of them don't happen. But I think I like the fact that they balance, the one thing with the other. So they're giving you the informed consent and scaring the hell out of you so that you really want to, you want to know that you really need it before you have it. Yeah.
How might prayer be used for someone without them knowing it? What visualizations or imagery might you use? Like sensory imagery or what?
If you're praying for somebody, I think the same thing applies if you're praying for someone, is that I think we'll talk about that a bit more when we do the last meditation. But I think the same thing that you do for yourself, you can do for somebody else. And I think it probably works better for somebody else maybe than it works for yourself. My feeling is that if you're doing it for yourself, it's good to get yourself out of the way, by being non-attached, but also maybe finding a reason why you want to get better. If I'm better, I'm going to follow my destiny and do something. It's not about me, it's about some bigger purpose. But we'll talk a bit about that when we have the meditation. Otherwise, I'll talk to you afterwards. Anybody else? Just in case. Oh, yeah.
Two things. Whenever I've been instructed about praying for other people, it's not praying for an outcome, it's holding them in love and light, because you don't know what's best for that person.
It's a good thing. Because of free will, being a cosmic law, you cannot pray for an outcome. You cannot pray, unless you ask the patient, can I pray for you? And they say, yes, please pray for me to be well. Then you can pray for the outcome the patient wants, and then you'll be in line with it. But if you're not in line with that, then you've got to pray for the greater good, or whatever words you want to say. Let the universe handle the details. You don't want to impose your will. There's two kinds of prayer. There's directed prayer, where you're praying for a particular outcome, and then you have to have the patient's permission. And there's non-directed prayer, which is what this lady's talking about, which is right. So in reality, I think the reason they're not doing more double-blind studies is because it's actually unethical to do a study where the patient does not know they're being prayed for. So in reality, that maybe the patient doesn't want to get better, maybe they want to check out. So that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, there's another factor,
Yeah.
and that is the high cost of some of these new medications that presumably they weren't developed by the pharmaceutical company, but by the FDA, and thousands of dollars that are, tagged on to these new medications.
You mean a corruption factor? Yeah, there's a big problem there. We have to. That would be the advantage of national health. Everything Bernie Sanders says is true. Everybody's getting paid off. It's at every single level, and I'm sure it's at the FDA level. Some drugs are favored, some drugs are not favored. We don't know what goes on underneath, the table. It's a problem. Yeah.
Opioids are the perfect example. Because we know for decades the farm they were doing,
Yeah.
profits overruled.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the lobbyists, got that taken care of in Congress, and the whole thing, that everybody who's sane would like to get rid of the lobbyists, but they'll never get rid of the lobbyists. So I think prognosis is pretty dismal.
Not as long as you have the prostitutes in Congress. Take.
Yeah. Well, there's more than prostitutes in Congress, but I don't know what's to happen. But it's another subject. Any other questions before? Yeah.
It's very true to have faith and hope for healing. I'm coming up to that because when my husband is his patient, I said to my husband, aren't you worried? He says, his hands are with Dr. Cumes. I already feel healed, everything is going to do all right. And everything comes all right. And that has been for years.
Oh, really? Good to know. Good. Any other questions? Good. Well, let's do the last meditation. I'll just give you the ancestors' words because you may not want to listen to them. We create our reality. We are what we imagine and believe ourselves to be. The soul's intention is empowered by imagination. Remember the emanation, the word. In the beginning was the word. I think of all the qualities of the creator, imagination is probably the most astounding one. You just have to look at nature and see how could anybody invent something like that? Just so bizarre. Intention is empowered with imagination. Whatever the heart yearns, you really got to want it from the heart. Whatever the heart yearns can be imagined. It is only for the will to activate it. So if you really, really want to get well in your heart and you activate it with will and imagination, that's a powerful combination. I hope this is answering your question over there. Imagination allows the vision. Intent sustains its potential. Acting with trust and surrender actualizes it with faith, belief, and love. So, these messages came actually after I did the Tree of Life, which was kind of interesting, because all those polarities we talk about are endorsed by the spirit world, because this is coming from spirit, not from my limited understandings of the Tree of Life. Words and imaging are essential for the subconscious to act. So the subconscious, the ancestors know, is a very powerful thing. And are most effective around sleep and also in a meditative state. So you don't have to be around sleep. But some people listen to tapes, around sleep, or sometimes do your imagination around sleep. And it doesn't have to be, this is not necessarily healing. It can be for anything that you want to do. But it should be something that's going to be of benefit to others, because otherwise it's about you, which often is not responded to by the spirit world. Are most effective around sleep. Imagination is dormant. Imagination is dormant unless activated by love. Intent is made real by imagination, imagining in detail. Why do you want to imagine in detail? Because of free will. Free will is the cosmic law. You can't say to the ancestors, help me with my life. And I often have that when I do divinations, they come in and say, what is my destiny? You can't ask the ancestors that. You can't ask the spirit world because of free will. You can ask them a particular question, like, should I take this teaching position? Is it in line with my destiny? And then they will answer you. But it has to be much more specific. It can't be very generalized. It's made real by imagining. So imagination is the way you actually get the details right. Now, they don't have to be 100% right. They just have to have the gist of what you're talking about. Whatever is not imagined cannot be fulfilled. Kind of a scary thing. Whatever is not imagined cannot be fulfilled. Soul imaging is best heard with the senses. So a lot of this stuff, guided imagery is with the senses. We've talked about the power of the senses. The route to God is through the senses. The route to the field is through the senses. If you are feeling it here, it's easier to believe in it. They said, as you think it, so it can be. As you believe it, so it will be. That's the problem, is to really, really believe it. Have the faith that it'll happen. Now that faith will come with a sensation. For instance, we talked about the shamanic ritual. I don't know where, I couldn't recommend a good shaman for you to go to because it's all corrupt these days. But if you could find the right shaman and go into an altered state of consciousness where you were beyond your normal state of mind and it was not programmed by all the nonsense that we've been fed, and you could actually feel and experience the field, then that's going to be much more powerful than anything else. So anything that has to do with a deep meditation or a nature experience where you have a peak experience and you go out on nature, something like that happens when you pray, where you see a sunset and you've already set the intent and then you fuse and become the sunset, that's going to be very much more powerful than without a sensation. That's the point of the music. So whoever wants, to do whatever it is, it can be eating a piece of chocolate or something you like. It can be listening to music. It can be drumming. It can be walking on the beach. You might not like this vibration of this music to meditate to, so maybe Gregorian chants or classical music. Whatever works best for your sensation is what you should be doing. But find a way, and we're going to talk a little bit about this with regard to medicinal plants when we talk about incense and baths that are sacred, where you can actually light incense. You can immerse yourself in a sacred bath full of medicinal plants. You can do the imagination in the bath with the help of the password of the plant to the spirit world to give you an outcome. It works. I don't know how, but it works. So let's do the meditation and again sit up straight. Take some deep breaths in and out. And everything in the spirit world works with intention, attention to detail, action, and affirmation. You need to keep doing it. You can't do it one time. The spirit world is in the present moment. They're living in the present moment up there. For them, free will is in the present moment. Free will is the cosmic law. So the affirmation is about continually affirming what you want and doing the imagination, which can change. The imagination doesn't always have to be the same. It should change. It might develop into something different. So the intention goes along with will, with passion, with commitment, with courage. Attention to detail gives them the detail they need for the healing outcome. They know exactly what you want. You're abrogating free will by telling them. You've got to take the action, you've got to make sure you do it, and then you've got to affirm, maintain, sustain. You've got to keep on doing it.